Good afternoon and welcome everyone to what I love to call the Penguin Parlor. My name is Jennifer Reynolds. I am a bit of an old hat, if you will, at travel, having worked in travel for a number of years, and I want to welcome you to my very first ever Penguin Parlor. I'm going to record this session, going to post it up on Jennifer Reynolds Travels. Upcoming topics will include a variety of what you see below. If you want to schedule something with me specifically, calendly.com/Jennifer Reynolds. I'll tell you, if you're not using that, it's really an extremely amazing and useful tool. But this afternoon, our 15 minutes together, and what I'm going to record and post up for us is Antarctica 101. A 15-minute story about this destination, followed by any kinds of questions or interaction that we might share. And next week, I invite you to join me back at the same time and place at 3 p.m. Eastern. And that topic will be a typical day in the Antarctica. Our focus and idea is to run 15 minutes exactly. My starting with Jennifer Reynolds. I'm originally born and raised in Canada. I spent an awful lot of years working and living on board cruise ships and was very fortunate to have traveled the world. I have been to all of the continents, and I see this picture here from the Silver Cloud in South America when I opened Silver Seas in South America and some of the first ever South American itineraries that they did. I love to post my things up on Jennifer Reynolds Travels. I make my home in Tampa, Florida, with my cat Alfie, and I have made my living in the travel industry my entire life. There has never been another industry that I've actually worked in, and it is such a place and such a pleasure to bring this kind of travel to other individuals. Earlier this year, I applied for and was accepted by the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators as what they call an Antarctic ambassador. For those of us that are as passionate about the place as I am, that means we essentially leap for Antarctica. We love it, we educate, we advocate, we protect. And that means in what I do in my life and in my professional world, it is always going to be Antarctica first, which is pretty amazing for a young girl from Canada who lives in Florida and is pretty much melting at the height of July. But it's really easy for me to get excited about things like the, let me enter someone. Latron just came in the waiting room. It's very easy for me to get excited about places like this. When I look at the Antarctic ice sheet being the largest on Earth, over 5 million square miles made up of mountain ranges, valleys, and plateaus, it's a pretty extraordinary environment, and only 1% of the Antarctic is ice-free. So it's here that we generally are going to play. For whoever just joined us, good afternoon and welcome. This is Jennifer. Thank you so much. Please mute yourself if you will. I will eventually learn how to do that fairly efficiently. But I'd like to show you how the first time I went to Antarctica in 1997, I was running shore excursions on board the Silver Cloud. We would come into the port in Punta Arenas and charter this national flight. And we would fly over the Antarctic and tip our wings and say hello to the Antarctic Peninsula. And that was primarily someone who would actually spend $1,200 in doing that with me, which was a pretty extraordinary amount of money to be spending on a journey over Antarctica where you were only just going to look at it from the air. And we still catered from the ship, if you can imagine that. The second time I got a chance to glance at the Antarctic, I did what we call a drive-by, and I'll share a little bit more information about that in just a moment. A drive-by is when you don't do a landing. My husband, we were actually on board an Oceania ship. He was the enrichment and expedition lead, and that's a photograph of him there at the bottom as we sailed into one of the islands, Deception Bay. As we go further, you'll understand that there can be no mistake in ever going to the Antarctic. There's no such time as a bad time of the year. There's only something different where you're going to visit here. So I had flown over Antarctica and looked at it for a moment or two. I had done a drive-by. And then my husband, who had worked for the Department of Oceanography at the Navy, teased me with his pictures of having wintered over in Antarctic. And I got a look at and discovered some of the materials that he had left behind, and I was sucked in. COVID had come in. I started reading more and more and more about the Antarctic, and that was it. I decided that I wanted to make a career out of this place, and perhaps why I enjoy it as much as I truly do, because it was only in the late 1800s when explorers first made their way down here. Late 1800s, everybody knows of Ernest Shackleton and the Endurance. I've read that book a number of times. Not only is it a magnificent story of survival, it's also an extraordinary story of management and leadership. And yet there was a whole nother book I found, and a whole another amount of individuals I found, called Forgotten Footprints, which are all of the explorers who went before, the Charcots, the Lindblads, all the individuals who opened it up. And I assure you, in future stories, we're going to be exploring more of those expeditions. But you know what? I wanted to go to the Antarctic and see it and feel it and taste it. I wanted to walk on the ground, that 1% of the ground that's available, because 99% of the continent is covered by ice. With the ability to get face to face with animal life. And this is not the cheapest, if you will, in the world destination to get to. It's one of the most remote. It's one of the most driest. $1,000 per person per day is generally at least the starting point to get to for going here. Let's just face it, if you forget the milk, you're not going to be doing a U-turn. But when you can make beach landings and see critters, and I've never been crazy cuckoo over birds, but I knew in Antarctica I had enough respect to know that the ice and the animal life are the individuals that make this place so extraordinary. So I was anxious to learn about individuals like the skuas, and quite excited when I discovered that penguins are actually birds. And there were 3 species that you will see down on the Antarctic Peninsula. And you know, this is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to fly over it. I didn't want to do a drive-by. I wanted to see it and smell it and taste it and feel it. I wanted to see these penguins on an eye-to-eye level. I wanted a chance to stop in a Zodiac and have an experience and an interaction with these whales. The chance to see the ice and get out there, knowing that this ice sheet is the largest in the world, and all it's doing is covering mountain valleys and ranges. There's deserts that exist here. There's volcanoes that are here. And I knew without a measure of a doubt I wanted to do Antarctica and do it in my kayak. And that too was a future story. With many of the expeditions and activities that can be done here, I took it up. And that was just yesterday morning, in heading down and doing some paddling a little bit close by. But let's get familiar with a map of Antarctica. We have about 7 minutes left together, and this is probably one of the most important things for you to understand. The jumping off point to get down here is the edge of South America. While many explorers have come down from Australia, anything that is considered to be south of the 60th degree south, and I put the arrows there for you, are considered to be part of the Antarctic. Nobody lives here on a permanent basis. The climate, the environment is completely at the exposure of Mother Nature, with polar fronts and convergences and really different experiences. You can fly over this convergence. You can sail over this convergence. The season for the Antarctic is November, December, January, February, March, and April. And in fact, I can only touch on that in a full-on future session. We'll focus exclusively on the destinations and the nuances that are involved. But krill are the king here. When you think that krill are the smallest thing in the ocean, and they are one of the most important in the food chain. And when you get down to the Antarctic, you start to understand why. I was down here in the 2019 season where there were 55,489 people traveling to the Antarctic, compared to the 1991-1992 season when there were 6,500 visitors. That much growth has taken place, but that growth is managed, and it's done extremely well by the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators. And I assure you, there is nowhere else in the world that exists like this place. It started with the Russian. We make fun of them going down here, but it did. It started with Russians and scientists in icebreakers going down. It moved into some light expeditions. Then we saw big cruise ships coming down here and doing what we call those drive-bys. It was really in the 70s when some of the tourism expanded. You see the refurbished Silver Cloud there. We now have helicopters. We've got submarines that operate down here. The vessel that I traveled on recently, but if there is one thing you take away from this experience with me here today, it is that no ship carrying larger than 500 people are permitted to make any landings, and no more than 100 people are permitted ashore at any one time from a vessel. So if you want to have this experience and you want to be on board a ship with 100 people where everybody can go ashore at the same time, most folks are going to start down in the Southern Hemisphere in Ushuaia or in Argentina in Punta Arenas. These are also discussions for future stories where we can get into more details about pre and post opportunities. But I need you to understand the map in front of you, because individuals will come down and go to the Antarctic and experience the Antarctic Peninsula. They then may stay a little bit longer, a few more days, and continue a bit further south, number 2, and go to the Antarctic Circle. Or they could really do it up nicely and head over to South Georgia Island and do that full itinerary, but it's going to take 3 weeks to do that. Most ships will sail out of Ushuaia in southern Argentina. Most charter flights, and that does exist if you don't want to sail over the Drake Passage. Those generally take place in February and March onwards. They fly from Chile for a myriad of reasons. The Chilenos seem to do charters just a little bit better than the Argentinians. But if you want to get over to South Georgia Island, it takes about 52 hours from the edge of the peninsula, and that too will be a future story. This is the home of the king penguins. This is the place in Grytviken where a population of seals and whalers pretty much decimated the population here. And it is where Ernest Shackleton made his round trip, bringing him back to the island of South Georgia. But there is so much to do here in the Antarctic, and it's hard to imagine that aside from going ashore every day in your Zodiac and doing landings and seeing and having these experiences, that these kind of additional activities like camping and skiing and diving and snorkeling and hiking exist. Everyone that goes down to the Antarctic is going to participate in guided hikes and Zodiac cruises and landings. But there are additional activities that can be done, and I highly recommend the polar plunge. It's really not as difficult as some people may say that it will be. But y'all, these are the folks that are going to make it or break it. This is the expedition team. These are the people, the oceanographers, the penguinologists. They too deserve their future stories. The geologists, the folks that are going to be taking you out in the Zodiacs, that are going to be managing you on a daily basis, explaining the weather with you, sharing their experience with you, heading up on deck and having lunches and meals, because Antarctica is not only about the place, it's definitely about the people and the expedition team that are leading you. It's about those that you meet along the way. And you know, getting to Antarctica isn't exactly the easiest thing in the world. So I like to say, while you're down there, would you grab us a loaf of bread? And so while we're down there, we often will gather interesting things through our citizen science program, like krill. We will do cloud counts. We will do penguin counts. We will look for microplastics in the water. We'll actually take cores and send these back to places in the United States, because we're actually doing science down there. So not the easiest place to get to. So while they're there, we'll catch you up on a few things and do some science and technology. And you can get as involved in that as you would like to. As we wrap up our last minute here, I share with you about families and multi-generationals. Those that are now home educated, it's an entirely new world out there, my friends. And people want to get down here and write their own stories and create their own stories. We've seen a significant increase in the amount of folks who want to get down to this part of the world and experience it in such a different way. So every Thursday at 3 p.m., I am going to be live in the Penguin Parlor. If you would like to join me and schedule a time outside of that, by all means do. On the bottom right-hand side at calendly.com/Jennifer Reynolds, an unbelievable tool where you can get right on my calendar and we can schedule 20 or 30 minutes to talk about this amazing place. But I will be back next week, same time, same place, talking about a typical day in Antarctica. I'll build on what we talked about today. And I encourage you to go to our travel agent section of our website and do look at Jennifer Reynolds Travels, because you're going to find this posted up there along with a bunch of other, what I hope is really, really useful stuff. But my name is Jennifer Reynolds. I'm an Antarctic ambassador, and I'm pretty crazy about this place. Thanks for joining me in the first ever Penguin Parlor. If there's other discussions you'd like to have, let's talk about groups. If there's other things you'd like to see, discussions you'd like to have, by all means, do share with me, because it is an amazing world and it's my job to help you discover it. Jennifer Reynolds, thanks for joining me. I'm going to stop my recording here and say thanks to those that have joined me. Thanks to those that are watching.